I am now recording. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this presentation about telepractice. I'm Emily Balcom, the Speech Language Pathology Clinical Coordinator here at Dalhousie University School of Communication Sciences and Disorders. So first, I'd just like to say that I have not been doing telepractice. So this information doesn't reflect my own personal experience. I've simply been doing a lot of research and continuing education on the topic since the pandemic started. So this presentation is information I've learned about telepractice, including teletherapy, teleassessment, teleconsultation, and telesupervision. Sorry, I'm just trying to see, there we go. Just trying to make sure that I can still see everyone. Okay. I can hopefully see if someone asks a question. So I cannot currently see the chat function when I'm in the presentation. So if you have a question at any time during the presentation, just turn off your mute and ask it verbally. All right, so preparing for telepractice. So the first thing to really consider, of course, is privacy and informed consent. So in Canada, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, what we call PIPEDA, is a federal law that gives people a right to access their personal information. It also requires organizations to obtain an individual's consent to collection, use, or disclosure of personal information. Hence the reason that we have consent forms. So when it comes to telepractice, we need to consider that we need to consider consent as well as privacy when we're using this form of practice with our clients. So as clinicians, we need to use secure platforms. I think probably the majority of people are using Zoom for healthcare at present, but there are other ones such as Cisco WebEx. We should make sure that we download our updates for Zoom. We need to make sure we have strong and secure passwords. When we send session links directly to a client, we make sure that it goes to them only. I think we've all learned from initially in the pandemic when Zoom bombing was a thing, that now we have a waiting room set up so that we can let people into our sessions when we know who they are. We also need to make sure that we are in a private spot when we're conducting telepractice sessions so as not to breach confidentiality of the client. So making sure that the door is shut to your room or office, you're wearing headphones so people can't overhear the session, or you're not in a room with other people where they can hear you speaking with the client or potentially see the client on your screen. We also need to make sure that the client clearly understands how telepractice will work and that they're able to consent to telepractice sessions and what that involves, including the presence of students in sessions, for instance, what assessment and treatment will look like via telepractice, the benefits and possible risks of using telepractice, as well as any outcomes or limitations. I think another important thing to think about when talking with clients about telepractice is how notes are going to be kept, especially if you're working from home, of course. So for instance, removing identifying information, only, keeping information with like initials, not having identifying information in documents. And finally, of course, consent forms should be really clear and easily understood by everyone. From an environment perspective, you want to make sure you have a neat and tidy background, put away clutter, avoid personal photos in the background, ensure that you're wearing professional dress, including pants, even though they might not be able to see you, from the waist down, just in case you stand up. Ensure comfort so that you're going to be comfortable in your position for the next hour-long session or however long it happens to be. Try to minimize noise, distractions such as pets, TV, children, especially if you're obviously working from home. or other people in your office, outdoor noise, if you're actually in a clinical setting. And of course, lighting. So making sure it's not too bright or too dark, because that will make it hard for the client to be able to see you. So windows and lights should be coming from in front of you instead of behind you, because then it creates big dark shadows, which makes it more difficult for the client to see you. And something important to be telling them as well, I think. Technology and equipment, make sure that your camera and microphone are positioned appropriately. So your camera should be pointed at your eye level. The speaker should be working, your volume's up, your microphone not too close to the speaker so you don't get that feedback noise. Wearing earphones or noise canceling headphones is probably best, especially if we're trying to listen for speech sounds, which are certainly more difficult to hear over the internet. And also keeping in mind your internet kind of connectivity. So if you're relying on Wi-Fi, then make sure you sit close to the router. Or I was reading some things that suggested you shut down and restart your computer every day before you start work, to help minimize any of those issues that might come up with not being able to get on the platform or whatever. So that can be useful. And of course, you need to have a troubleshooting plan. If audio or visual issues happen, what are you going to do when that occurs? Are you going to have the client's phone number handy so that you can call them in case the internet stops working or you lose somebody? And so it's good to have a plan in place for that. You want to make sure that you're familiar with the platform, so practice beforehand. Certainly client preparation is really important, sending them step-by-step instructions about how to get on the platform. So Zoom for Healthcare, how to log on, processes for them to maintain their privacy and security, expectations of participation in sessions, including the caregiver or parents' participation in sessions and what you expect of them. And if people are able to sign in a little bit early so you can just troubleshoot any audio-visual issues, that can be very useful. And of course, you want to be prepared, so have your materials ready in advance. Make sure that they can be accessed via Telepractice. Schedule in sometimes for breaks so that you're not, so that the client takes a little break within the sessions, and as well as it gives you a bit of time to maybe get materials ready for the next task. And also a little bit of extra time in between clients so that you have some time to prepare. When I was reading a lot about telepractice, and obviously these are some of the things that came up as kind of general tips for doing telepractice with our speech language pathology clients. So clear, consistent communication, keeping instructions concise, sending reminders for upcoming sessions. If you're actually in the session with the client, you can use the chat function in the software to clarify information with clients. You should also be aware that there might be a time lag between the transmission and reception of a signal. So just allow a little extra time for the client to hear and process the message before you begin speaking again. You may want to initially contact clients and families or other professionals by phone to discuss the expectations, how long the session will last, what to expect, what platform you'll use, how the family will get the invitation, how you expect parents to participate in sessions, the goals you target, all of those things. Keeping digital files and hard copies organized, so keeping your calendar updated so that you clearly know when clients are scheduled. You can send reminders through email to clients as well. If no one signs in after 5 minutes, maybe make sure that you have that phone number so that you can call them, so you don't waste too much time sitting in on the session. Or if they're having trouble getting in, that you can try to help troubleshoot via phone. And of course, having a backup plan. So if your client, especially younger clients, don't respond or engage well to your, original activities, then, make sure you have a backup plan in place, other things that you might be able to try. But it's important to also have realistic expectations. Telepractice isn't going to work well for everyone, and that's okay. So, but, having that discussion with the family or the client after that fact about how you might change things or try again. Is anyone else getting lots of feedback? Sorry, I'm just seeing this message now. Or is it sounding okay? No feedback. Okay, so maybe it was just, okay, computer. Hopefully it's okay. Great. Try to keep this chat so I can see. Okay. So like in all sessions with our clients, we really need to consider, the cultural background of our clients in telepractice as well. So, firstly, we want to make sure that we are, working towards our own cultural competence. So we want to focus on attaining skills, knowledge, attitudes to work with clients from various backgrounds in effective and respectful ways. So, we need to demonstrate cultural humility, where we forfeit our own assumptions with regard to clients of different backgrounds. And obviously this is a lifelong practice, but it is important in all aspects of our care, including telepractice. And of course, we always want to consider cultural and linguistic biases when we select assessment tools, as usual, to avoid misdiagnosis of language differences and not disorders. A few things to consider when involving families in care via telepractice is making sure that you have a discussion about their participation, your expectations of their participation. We need to make sure that the family's clients can use the telepractice platform. And really it's crucial that, families are reminded, especially parents are reminded, that they're the most important teacher for their child, despite the need for speech therapy services. Certainly, telepractice can be a real benefit. It allows us to provide therapy in a home environment when we might not have been able to. So clients, parents, caregivers can use familiar toys, objects, routines to assist in those carryover of skills. And SLPs can also help families establish a routine that allows for language stimulation or support. And of course, it is important that we consider some of those cultural differences around parenting style, language use, home routines, when we transition to telepractice services. And finally, as usual with our culturally and linguistically diverse clients, we want to make sure that our activities and materials reflect those diverse backgrounds, and that we include materials in our sessions that that are relevant to the client. From a telepractice perspective, certainly there's some unique learning opportunities for speech language pathology students in these in this setting. We can really be, as clinical educators and even as students, you can be thinking about these things, like what were you able to achieve during telepractice? What was challenging about telepractice? What, if anything, would you do differently if you had been in person? How was the plan impacted by providing virtual care? Was the visit beneficial for the client? What clients would in-person sessions be better for than telepractice sessions? So certainly some interesting learning opportunities there. So during the pandemic, at least initially, many clinicians were seeing fewer clients than before, obviously, whether that was a result of increased cleaning and infection control measures when clients started coming back into the office, resulting in fewer client spots. Some clients were choosing to take a break from services until, you know, I won't say the words the pandemic is over, because who knows when that will be, but until later in time. Or some clients may not be wanting students to be part of their in-person sessions in an attempt to reduce the number of people that they're exposed to in their lives. But regardless of why, there might be some extra downtime for students in placements where telepractice is a part, or during these COVID times. So just keeping in mind that students can be involved in a number of different tasks beside direct client care. So scheduling clients, maybe triaging clients, providing additional therapy sessions via, telepractice, participating in special projects or presentations, adapting materials, developing materials for use in teletherapy sessions, report writing, treatment planning, and of course other tasks if they are in the office as well, such as disinfecting materials, those types of things. I think in general, when we're talking about telepractice in our current life situations in the time of COVID, it's important to think about our health and wellness. It is a stressful time for everyone. So, and particularly for students. So having regular check-ins and debriefing sessions with them, how's it going, what's been difficult, and of course, encouraging everyone to try to maintain their overall health in these difficult times. And of course, certainly for students, and well, for everyone, seek support if needed. For students, those options include faculty members like their academic advisor, the clinical coordinator, myself, and various options through the Dallas Student Health and Wellness Center. I think most people are using Zoom for healthcare, so I wanted to just include a link as we finish up this kind of telepractice section of the presentation. There's a really great webpage through the Nova Scotia Health Authority on using Zoom for healthcare. It's a nice guide on that, including like how to use waiting rooms, managing participants, security, sharing your screen, using the whiteboard, and how to use polls and managing breakout rooms. There are a few, some really nice things. So this is a good link to be checking out if you want a little bit more information about Zoom for healthcare. All right, so next I'd like to talk about teleassessment. So before you complete an assessment via telepractice, certainly you want to consider a number of questions. How would you gather this information in a face-to-face visit? Can you do this virtually? Is the information you would obtain valid and reliable? Are there risks to gathering the information through telepractice? How will you ensure to provide appropriate intervention post-teleassessment? Is the assessment tool conducive to telepractice? How long will it take to complete? Does your client have the materials and supports necessary at home to participate in this? So there are a number of things to be thinking about. If you could believe you can do the assessment validly and reliably via telepractice, you can prepare by reviewing provincial, regulatory body and professional association documents. So our Nova Scotia College, SAC has lots of documents, and certainly any guidelines that they may have around teleassessment. Pearson, so one of the main publishers of speech language assessment tools, has some excellent resources on teleassessment on their website as well that I encourage you to look at. Of course, you need to consider the clinical relationship between the client and clinician. You might need to establish a face-to-face relationship You know, with some clients, and you know, that rapport might be really important, and so maybe you don't do you know, assessments via telepractice for those clients, or you consider how you might build rapport before getting into those assessments. Thinking about the purpose of the assessment, so it might not be appropriate to complete remotely if you need to be sure that the correct person is taking the test, or if there are some type of legal circumstance that says it has to be completed in person, maybe like some insurance, post-traumatic brain injury or something, or if you need to actually observe the actual test administration in detail. If you're going to be doing assessment via telepractice, you know, it can be very useful to have a trained facilitator available and to prepare them. So, you know, you have to think about how are you going to be able to see the client's response to receptive test items. So, you know, the items that they point to on a stimulus page that you'll be showing them, you know, on your, you know, through the computer. Will the client or caregiver or the set up a second phone or laptop that's also logged into the video conferencing session, pointed at the screen so that you can see where they pointed? Or will you have, you know, you're going to have to, if you do have that caregiver facilitator, you have to explain to them how to set that device up or what the expectations are. Are they sometimes, I had seen that if the SLP was working with a child doing an assessment, the parent would sit in the back and give a thumbs up for a correct answer or not. But you also have to, you know, consider accuracy of that as well. So lots of things to be thinking about when you are doing an assessment via telepractice. Obviously, you need to make sure that you have your assessment procedures and materials ready, how you're going to be able to record the client's responses to test items, how you plan to give the client breaks during testing, making sure that only authorized people are present during the session, be clear on directions to the client, and of course be prepared. So even practicing ahead of time of how you're going to do this. And that's certainly something that, you know, a student, an SLP student and the SLP could practice. They could both log into a thing and just practice a bit how they're actually going to do an assessment via telepractice. And as usual, you need to have a conducive testing environment. The client needs to be in a conducive testing environment too, so that they're in a space that's free of distractions. There's not a, you know, a child, you know, running around or playing in the background being really loud, so that you're able to hear them and they're able to hear your instructions. Using a headset if possible with a mic, and of course discontinue testing if there are technical issues that arise. So just like in a regular in-person assessment, you want to make sure that you're getting, you know, informed consent from the client in advance of doing an assessment via telepractice. So make sure the client and caregiver understands the differences and advantages of using in-person assessment versus online assessment. Be sure to explain to the client or caregiver that they have the option of an assessment in person when it becomes available. And of course, making sure that you discuss privacy and what you're doing to ensure their privacy. Certainly there are some advantages to a teleassessment process. Might be that there's less of a wait time for them to be seen because they don't have to come in. Observing, you can actually see the client in the home environment or possibly other environments, which is good. And of course, there certainly are some disadvantages. You might miss information that's easier to see or hear in person, like articulation errors. Might be more difficult to keep interest via telepractice assessment than in person, of course. And you can't control their environment because you're doing this remotely. The rest of the teleassessment process can be very similar to what you would do in a real session. Obtaining case history information, you can do a client or caregiver interview, certainly observations and informal measures, standardized assessments. Obviously, you need to think about all of the those aspects listed there. And then, of course, just like in an in-person assessment session, you have an information sharing portion after the assessment is done to share the results. So just a few additional considerations if you're going to be doing assessment during telepractice, practicing. So make sure you run through the assessment before so that you can, figure out exactly how you're going to administer it. The client microphone should be at chin level, and especially if they have a boom microphone, one of those microphones that comes out in front of your mouth, but it shouldn't be blocking your view of their mouth. So it should be pulled down a bit so that you can see their mouth. We talked about this. You might need to have a second device aimed at the computer screen that the client is seeing so that you can see their responses to items, especially receptive test items. It's important to only be showing, one stimulus picture or page at a time on the screen so that, it's not visually overwhelming for the client. Make sure that they can see the entire picture or page on the screen so that, especially, think about that. If you're going to be holding something up, can you hold it up for long enough and, not accidentally move the test manual out of the way so then they can only see part of the items on the page. You really have to, think about how they're going to be able to see it best. And using full screen to eliminate distractions is really important. Okay, so this is the information I could find on some possible tools that can be used validly and reliably through teleassessment. So there's initial early evidence to suggest that these tools via telepractice may result in scores equivalent to those obtained via face-to-face administration. It should be noted that this was from preliminary evidence in most cases, so caution should of course be taken. And it's also important to note that items with manipulatives might not be able to be administered remotely. And clinicians may be required to request permission from the publisher to use some assessment tools via telepractice. So you should kind of Google that initially, go to the Pearson page or whatever the publisher is of the tool you're using, just to make sure that they don't require that you have special permission to use it before you use it. And of course, it's important to note that if a test is administered via telepractice, that you reflect that in your reports and include a statement in your report about whether or not there's evidence to suggest score equivalence with face-to-face administration. So it is important to note that. These are some of the links that I found to have some useful information about assessment via telepractice. So which one I see? Oh yeah, on the Pearson links, there's like a links and resources section on their website, and there's a document that you can download called Hello Examinee, Remote Administration Preparation Letter, and it was really helpful to figure out that administration preparation. The other ones were as well, but that was particularly useful. All right, so teletherapy. So when you're preparing for teletherapy, again, this has been on many slides, ensuring that you have informed consent for therapy. And of course, thinking about how you'll engage the client, the caregiver in telepractice, how you will prepare them. And just like we talked about with teleassessment, laying out clear expectations for the client and caregiver during those teletherapy sessions. And the same rules apply as for in-person treatment. You want to make sure that you have short and long-term goals established for the client, that you have a treatment plan, you have an idea about how you're going to collect data and measure progress through teletherapy. And of course, especially if you happen to be working from home, how you'll be charting or documenting. So research suggests that telepractice shows promise for use in the treatment of speech sound disorders, particularly in children, of course, language disorders. So there's some evidence out there for both language treatment for children and adults, including children with autism. Voice disorders, the research that I found was particularly for providing service for people with vocal nodules or muscle tension dysphonia. There's some evidence for using teletherapy for treating fluency disorders. That was in both children and adults. Evidence for the Lidcombe program, the Camperdown program, and like an integrated approach, like including starting modification, fluency shaping, avoidance reduction, desensitization. There's research about aphasia and primary progressive aphasia, as well as Parkinson's disease. In that case, it was using the LSVT Loud program via telepractice for individuals with Parkinson's. And even dysphagia. So there's some research out there suggesting that via distance, you can be providing cueing to clients on like postural or compensatory strategies, which was really interesting. I think just in general, it was noted that further research in the treatment of motor speech disorders, AAC, and dementia via telepractice was needed. So some teletherapy considerations. Have your materials open and ready to share. So, like you have all of your tabs opened up, you have all of your, if you're going to share a PDF file, that you have that opened up so that you're ready to go in the session. Know your long-term and short-term goals, obviously, and develop goals according to those. Trying to vary your content to keep clients engaged as well. So, if you're showing, just pictures and, the client is, talking about that picture, or, labeling the picture, maybe show a video after 4 or 5 pictures, or, trying to use authentic or personalized materials that are engaging for the client as possible. A lot of SLPs talked about like asking families to send them pictures of, especially of the child, if you're working with children, having the family send pictures of the child to you that you can then use in the therapy sessions, on a PowerPoint or something to keep the kids engaged. They like to look at themselves. Having interactive activities and turn taking when possible. We're going to talk about some possible ways to do that in a couple of slides. And of course, visual engagement. I watched one continuing education presentation through SAC, I think, and the clinician talked about even like throwing pom-poms at the screen was like a great communication temptation for one kid. And I think, that's really interesting way to think about, visual engagement, particularly for young kids. Some other things I saw are like playing peekaboo or hide and seek, barrier games. I mean, telepractice is the perfect way to do a barrier game, certainly. Games like headbands, where, if you're working on a goal, a game like that might work. You can share iPad apps through your computer screen, YouTube videos, online games and books. There are lots of kind of different options out there for, visually engaging and maybe interactive activities. So you might actually be displaying materials like holding up our tick cards for the client to see, or pictures, real life photos. Books, you might be have objects or hiding objects maybe in the background. you know, or the child has to tell you where to look for them, you know, under the chair, on the table, beside the lamp. You know, you can kind of be thinking of some interesting ways to be targeting goals over the internet. There are lots of websites and web-based materials out there. And you can allow your client remote access so that they can even manipulate or move pictures around in a PowerPoint or play a web-based game, either as reinforcement or as part of the therapy. Certainly I mentioned the YouTube videos can keep it interactive. Let's see. Could be doing co-creation of materials with clients. So maybe making a book together via PowerPoint or something. You can be using pretend or imaginative play with child clients. So you might have some objects and the child tells you what to do, or you might ask the parents in advance to have some specific toys available on their end, like a stuffed animal and some play food or some cans of food from the kitchen. And you can play with your own stuffy and your own food while the child plays with their own stuffy and their own food on their end, but you can still be talking together and potentially working on things. I know a lot of information I was seeing is that, you know, especially with young kids, SLPs were like dressing up in costumes to keep them visually engaged. Some clinicians even had like a green screen and were like showing, you know, like Peppa Pig on the green screen or things like that. It's maybe, it's a lot, but it's certainly doable if you manage to get yourself a green screen. I think just like, you know, in a lot of our therapy sessions, especially with young children, incorporating motor movements and activities is, you know, can be important too. So maybe charades or, you know, that you work with the family to set up hide and seek in the child's room. And they have to, you know, the child has to go find it and then has to come back and tell the clinician, hold it up and show the clinician what they found and tell them about it or whatever it happens to be. So I think when you can incorporate motor movement, that can be useful. And of course, I think this has been happening a lot, or was when people were using telepractice more initially in the pandemic, that a lot of parent or caregiver coaching is happening as well. So where the parent or caregiver is interacting with the client and you're providing, you know, feedback, suggestions for language facilitation strategies or how to work on specific goals with the parent or caregiver. So when engaging particularly young clients, you know, obviously thinking about their interests and activities that would be really important to them, incorporating their own toys as they're, you know, manipulating things on their end, or maybe they do a show and tell with you where they hold up things and, you know, talk about them. For adults, just like in regular therapy, non-telepractice therapy, you want to use materials that are relevant to their interests and lives. You know, you could use online news articles, online recipes if they're interested in cooking, you know, similar things to what you might do in a clinic setting. Of course, having a consistent structure, so setting up a routine can, you know, increase your chances of success. Providing visual schedules, reviewing rules before you get started, offering reinforcing activities, choices to keep them motivated, reviewing expectations with everyone, especially with caregivers about, you know, how to manage behaviors or their participation in sessions. Mixing it up, we talked about that before, a variety of different activities and ways of presenting them, you know, songs, pictures, videos, online books or games. Whatever that happens to be. Make adjustments as need be. So a session might not always be successful. You might want to switch to a parent coaching model. If that is the case, if it was with a pediatric client, you might need to think about having shorter sessions maybe to keep engagement. You know, that certainly for pediatric and adult clients, change the time of day that the sessions occur, and of course, making sure you keep open communication with caregivers so that you can talk about how it's going and make changes to the teletherapy sessions as need be. Oops, I didn't advance that slide, sorry. Okay, so parent caregiver coaching. So make sure you discuss technology requirements. So it might be easier, you know, for if you're going to be coaching them, that maybe they have headphones that they wear where you can talk to them and they can implement the strategies that you're recommending with the child. You might simply do this through the phone over speaker or just use laptop speakers. You know, keeping your sessions short, maybe 30 to 45 minutes, targeting 1 or 2 skills so as not to overwhelm the parent or the child for that matter. Having specific expectations and feedback, so letting the parent know exactly what you want them to do and what you don't want them to do, providing praise when they do it well, and you know, providing suggestions for how to improve as well. And I think just keeping in mind that silence is okay. You don't need to be talking the whole time. Just like in a regular therapy session, you'd be letting the parent interact with the child for a bit before you stepped in and provided feedback or advice. And that's the same in telepractice as well. So group teletherapy, I watched a few continuing education events, professional development events on group teletherapy, especially for adults, in this case, adults with aphasia. You know, and a lot of the recommendations were that you have maybe individual onboarding sessions. So an initial session where it's not done in a group, where it's done individually with the client so that you can, you know, help prepare them for the upcoming group session, providing them with step-by-step instructions on how to join the teletherapy session. For adults, the recommendation was 4 to 5 clients per group instead of larger groups. I know, you know, at our school, our aphasia clinic's communication group was upwards of 12 to 15 clients pre-pandemic. But from what I've seen in with regard to, you know, teletherapy group sessions, a fewer number of clients is certainly easier to moderate. Having a moderator is important, so making sure that only one person speaks at a time. You as the clinician can make sure that you use the mute button for everyone, and like unmute people as you want to unmute them. It's certainly important to use communicative partners as need be, especially if you're going to be doing group therapy with children. There, you know, they talked about incorporating homework activities into it, into your group therapy sessions, using breakout rooms. So if you have 6 clients, then you might break them out into 2 smaller breakout rooms and work on kind of different skills or more specific goals. That can, of course, be extremely useful if there are speech language pathology students or communication disorders technicians that can also join in sessions, because then you can have someone kind of moderating each breakout room. And a lot of what I heard from the professional development sessions that I attended, participated in, was that, you know, just like in group therapy, in real life, it does help foster those interpersonal connections between clients, which is certainly an added bonus at a time when interacting with other people has been difficult. I thought, so Tactus Therapy has a great step-by-step on how to mirror apps onto your computer screen. So you can watch a video about how to do it there, or you can go in and like type in your email address and they'll send you the actual handout. And I found it useful to, as I was preparing for this session, to kind of read through and see how you would do that. Here are a few instructions on how you can share most control within teletherapy sessions so that your client has remote access to the mouse and could play the little game as reinforcement, or an adult manipulates some material on the actual screen. So you have to share your screen with the client, and then you locate that like meeting control menu. So when you move your mouse around on the screen, you get to that thing that tells you, you can click on participants, you start video, mute yourself, that kind of control thing. You go to remote control. It actually shows a picture of like a mouse, a computer mouse. And then you select give mouse keyboard control to, and then select the client's name and they'll have access. And then for you to regain control, you just click anywhere on your screen and it gives control back to you, which is certainly a great feature. I'm talking about Zoom for healthcare and Zoom in general. I don't know about Cisco WebEx, but for Zoom, this is how you can share your mouse. So I don't think I actually shared this in the email I sent, but I'll include it when I send the link to the recording of this. Actually, I started to develop kind of like a spreadsheet of different web-based materials that could be potentially used for teletherapy. And then like a little description of what each website is and maybe some possible goals that could be worked on based on what's on that website. So I will actually send that out when I send out the link to the recording. This is just some possible options listed out, but I have a nicer spreadsheet that I've started that you're welcome to add to. I thought these were some useful videos on using teletherapy, how to use teletherapy. Boom Cards has come up a lot. It's this website that you can sign up for. You pay for some materials, but lots and lots of materials are free. And it shows, there's a nice YouTube video on how to use Zoom and Boom Cards. And then just kind of a little crash course in teletherapy. So I liked these two little YouTube videos. All right, so teleconsultation. So obviously Telepractice provides us, a way to consult between team members as well, and all members of the team, client, family, school team, healthcare team, community team, whoever that happens to be. It also could allow us as speech pathologists to consult with other SLPs who specialize in a specific area. And teleconsultation might help improve access to care, improve scheduling flexibility in some instances, certainly decrease travel time, which can have, some significant cost savings as well. So now it's kind of researching about teleconsultation. Certainly some facilitators of having a good teleconsultation session included, making sure that, there was some training and some planning on the front end before you got into the session. So, thinking about client suitability, we know technology is not the best option for all of our clients, certainly. But if it is, then we want to ensure that everyone can use the Telepractice platform, making sure that the team is well coordinated, the duties and responsibilities are clear for everyone. Who's going to be chairing the session? Is someone going to chair the session? Who's going to send the links for the consultation session? Having system supports is important. So, you know, having high quality technology, a usable system, and then, you know, having some IT support if there's troubleshooting issues. Again, establishing good communication and rapport. A lot of studies suggested that having an initial face-to-face meeting helps build rapport, but in at least initial pandemic times, that wasn't possible. But you know, when you are on a telepractice consultation, then certainly adhering to camera etiquette, ensuring privacy in the room, attending to verbal and nonverbal communication, making sure professional. Keeping in mind client-centered care as always, so ensuring the focus is on the client and their goals. You know, have to have a willingness to adapt, so both to telepractice and, you know, sharing responsibilities within the team. And leadership. So it was helpful if somebody was willing to coordinate and or chair the sessions. Few barriers, of course, technical issues. I think that is the, you know, the one like not so great thing about telepractice is dropped calls, poor audio or video quality, and of course, possible privacy or safety concerns. Having coordination or organizational challenges, if there's ambiguous responsibilities or, you know, there might be increased workload issues with some of those things. And of course, just like in regular settings, any problematic relationships. So if there was tension or mistrust, that could be a barrier to successful teleconsultation sessions. Nova Scotia Health Authority also has a nice kind of handout on clinical case conferencing using Zoom for Healthcare, which I thought was really good, and that's the link to it there. And finally, lastly, just talk a little bit about telesupervision. So telesupervision is a method where video conferencing technology is used to provide clinical supervision. So that might include using video conferencing like Zoom for Healthcare or email or text or instant message or some other kind of web-based resources that exist. I mean, SLPs don't always just use telesupervision for speech language pathology students. It might be mentoring other peers, working with support personnel, and of course, students during practicum placements. So there are certainly some benefits to telesupervision. Access to clients in remote areas, obviously, reduced transportation expenses for student preceptor, access to a wider array of preceptors, certainly. There can be, you know, good immediacy of feedback within practicum placements. Sometimes scheduling can be easier in that sense. And students actually felt that when they were supervised via telepractice, it increased their clinical independence, helped them develop professional relationships, their flexibility, their independent critical thinking, which is certainly excellent benefits. There are certainly some possible limitations of telesupervision. So students being supervised via telepractice, you know, demonstrating evaluation or treatment techniques that rely on, you know, instruction from the supervisor. So certainly there are some possible solutions to that. The preceptor, the clinical educator jumps in on the session and demonstrates the technique. You discuss post-session how to implement that treatment technique, maybe with visual demonstration for the student. Certainly it can be difficult for students to learn or to see how clinical educators collect data for clients when they're not in the room physically seeing the clinical educator do that, when they, you know, are in separate locations. So, you know, obviously some possible solutions are moving the webcam so that the preceptor can see how students are collecting data during sessions, or so the student can see how the preceptor is collecting data, sending data at the end of a session so that you can discuss it together. Certainly if a student is, you know, working from their own space outside of the clinic and being supervised remotely, that doesn't necessarily allow for access to the electronic medical record, which can be difficult for, you know, preparing for clients if you don't have access to that. Certainly some feelings of isolation. So, you know, checking in regularly, scheduling regular feedback sessions are important. Obviously technology related challenges, video freezing, cutting out, those types of things. And possibly difficulty scheduling and difficulty reading nonverbal cues, especially when video or audio issues exist. So, you know, there are a number of things to consider when doing telesupervision. So what it looks like in practice will depend on logistics in part, as well as the learning style of the student. So certainly some things to consider there. From a location perspective, when we're talking about telesupervision, mainly what I'm talking about here is when the preceptor, student, and client are all in different locations and providing service from all different locations. But certainly, I think in a lot of instances, for at least for our practicum placements this semester, the preceptor and student will be in the same space or co-located, and on occasion the client will be seen via distance. So, you know, when the preceptor and the student are in the same space, obviously you need to consider distancing, mask requirements as per the your organization's policies. And when the preceptor, student, and client are all in different locations, that certainly requires more intentional and explicit feedback delivery after the session. You know, much of what I'll talk about in this section of the presentation is what this would look like if everyone was not in the same location, if the clinical educator, the student, and the client were all in different locations. And you have to think about the availability of the clinical educator as well for supervision. Is the clinical educator going to be there for the entire session, for part of a session? Are they going to be available for consultation? If so, how? Are you going to text them? Will they email you? You know, you have to kind of think about what that might look like. When I think for the majority of at least our internship placements, most students will not be supervised remotely by the clinical educator. The clinical educator and the student will be in the same space or co-located, but I'd like to, you know, discuss it as it is happening for some of our placements, telesupervision, and or it might happen in some of them. So certainly it's important to establish and maintain effective working relationships. Certainly video conferencing changes the way we exchange information. We all know that. So kind of working to really maintain and establish that a good rapport is important. So regularly having structured, planned, and regularly scheduled supervisory conferences between the student and the clinical educator. And of course, demonstrating mutual respect, trust, caring attitude, all of those things. In telesupervision placements where the student is not with the clinical educator, it's really important that there is an orientation for the student, you know, so that the clinical educator orients the student to roles, caseloads, telepractice and telesupervision, the feedback schedule, what the plan is for that day, week, the placement in general, as well as, of course, of online security, safety, privacy, and confidentiality issues, including being in a quiet room, ensuring confidentiality so that, you know, other roommates, family, friends can't see client sessions, how data or information is stored, you know, if the student is taking data, you know, that everything is de-identified, and of course being transparent with clients about that process and what that will look like. Want to set clear goals and expectations for supervision, what's going to be the responsibility of the clinical educator, what's going to be the responsibility of the student, the medium of communication that you're going to use. Are you going to regularly be meeting through Zoom via healthcare? Are you going to, if you're going to be trying to teach hands-on skills to a student, are you going to do that via video teleconferencing? And of course, you want to have a plan to manage technical issues. So having that backup plan, who's going to restart the call with the client? If video conferencing isn't available, what are you going to use? Are you going to use the phone? Who's going to call the client? Who's going to be the one to start the three-way call? Having that contact information, all of those things. And of course, you want to pay attention to communication, avoiding distraction and that temptation to multitask if you're watching your client, watching the student interact with the client. So maybe you have a dedicated workspace to engage in the supervision, being comfortable with silence. You know, if there is, you know, silence in a session, you know, when will the clinical educator jump in? Does the student just need more time to get, you know, prepared to start the next task? Or how will the student ask for the supervisor's help during the telepractice session if they need them? All of those things. As well as good speaking etiquette. So making sure there's appropriate turn taking, you're clear when you're speaking, you're using the mute button while you're listening. And of course, the importance of providing effective feedback doesn't change in a telepractice session. It still should be timely, specific, and related to the observed behaviors that the clinical educator is seeing the student do. Although the content of the feedback may change slightly. It might now include, you know, discussion of communicating via technology, confidentiality and risks of virtual care, professionalism in a virtual context, certainly. When I was kind of researching telesupervision and the student and the clinical educator not being in the same place, a lot of what I saw was that clinical educators might be booking a session with a client for an hour, but after 50 minutes, they are telling the client, okay, or telling the client in advance, after 50 minutes, we'll have you leave the session, and then the student and I will, you know, have a supervisory meeting for the last 10 minutes. That's certainly a nice way to do it. You book in an hour session, and then you have that 10 minutes for feedback and discussion with the student. You need to think about, yeah, like how the clinical educator and the student will be in contact with each other during the session. You know, are you going to use text message to provide feedback to the student? Are you going to jump in and turn on your mic and talk to the student within the session? Are you going to use the chat function in Zoom for Healthcare? Certainly some things to think about there. And certainly for clinical educators, thinking about how you're going to be providing feedback. So it might be the same as in person, that you watch and then provide verbal feedback. Perhaps you're also taking written feedback as you go and, you know, sending that off to the student after as well. So, you know, really thinking about that. I think it's important to be talking about what this telesupervision arrangement will look like, and updating that process as you need to throughout. So that is actually the end of the short presentation on telepractice. There are lots of references here that I found really useful, and they're all listed there for you to have a look at if you're interested. Stop share there for a sec. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments or personal experiences to share? Hopefully there was some information in here. I know, again, I have not been doing telepractice, so this is all information that I've gotten from kind of the research or the professional development I've been doing. So, you know, certainly may look very different, you know, in practice, but thought the information might be useful.
Yeah, the information was useful. Thank you, Emily. It was interesting to hear what tests have had some evidence. Like, I didn't know the SLP. That makes sense where it is in the booklet, but it's kind of good to hear that we are starting to get some research in the field to show what's evidence-based for our assessment and all that, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not the easiest to find all of this information. So I thought if I can just put a little bit of everything into one presentation, then maybe that would be useful. So thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Any other questions or thoughts?
Emily, it's Janice. I just was going to share for those who aren't aware that with Hearing and Speech Nova Scotia, the pediatric SLPs, majority of our work is, whether it's in person or through telehealth, is parent coaching and parent education. That's the highest priority for what we do. So we're doing a mix of in person and through telehealth, but we are doing a lot of, not doing many groups of children online, but we are, and we can't do any groups in person, but we're doing a lot of parent education programming through Zoom. So groups of parents who get the information, and then we do individual coaching through Zoom or in person.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So like Hannon, like the Hannon style programs, but
right.
Yeah, through telepractice.
We've adapted some of our previously in-person programs to be that sort of format.
Awesome. That's great. It'll be great for some of the students to get experience with that in this like internship placement that they're just about to do. Sounds good.
I'm hoping the student can teach me some of the Zoom functions. I tend to know more about these things. So.
They've gotten very good with Zoom, and yeah, I mean, they're already good with technology, but yeah, we've been using Zoom a lot these last few months. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll just send a link to everybody with that, the link to the recording, but also with the document that I developed for just some of those online web-based materials that might be useful. There's some really, you know, great free stuff on the internet that you can be using. So yeah, that's great. All right. If there's no other questions, then I will say goodbye, and thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Thanks so much. It was nice to see some of your faces, at least see your names, if not your faces. So yeah, have a lovely weekend, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.